Stewardship, managing God's blessings, God's way. Because it's good to be blessed, but you also have to manage your blessings in a way that will make them feel, make them palpable, make them really change something in your life and show that it is an added benefit that you get. So managing God's blessings, God's way for God's glory. Because it's not only enough to manage your life in a good way, but you also have to remember that everything that you do has to be for the glory of God, because you represent God wherever you are. You represent God in your own personal life when you are just by yourself. You represent God when you are with your family, when you're at work, even when you are at church. So managing God's blessings, God's way for God's glory. And one of the aims, well, the main aim that I have in the Department of Stewardship over the next 3 years while I will be there, by God's grace, anything can happen. But it's supposed to be 3 years. I want to encourage Riverway and all the churches across our conference to live better, to love better, and to serve better. Because everything that we have is a blessing from God. And if we truly learn to manage those blessings in the right way, we will definitely have a better life with a better relationship with God and with one another. We will definitely have an amazing love for God and for one another. And we will learn to serve and make our life a life of service. So live better, love better, and serve better. And that being said, today my message is about holistic stewardship. It's about our responsibility to manage God's blessings in various ways. And I will focus on the three main aspects that we promote in the stewardship department, and that is the stewardship of time, of talent, and of treasures. There are many more, but we can incorporate all these under these three big categories: time, talent, and treasures. And I was reading a story a few weeks ago about a man called John Pounds. Have you heard of John Pounds? Has anyone heard of John Pounds from Portsmouth? No? Well, he lived, you heard about him? Excellent, excellent. Well, you probably didn't hear about him because he lived a long time ago. He lived in early 1800s, and John Pounds was a cobbler. So he had a small workshop. He was not a very rich man, but what do cobblers do? They repair shoes. Yeah, so he was repairing people's shoes in his small workshop. John, in those days, he had some basic literacy skills, and he was just minding his business. But as he was walking through his neighborhood one day, he noticed that there were too many poor children who did not have access to education. They couldn't read, they couldn't write, they didn't know any maths. So John thought, well, I'm not a rich man. I don't have a big house. I haven't even been to school, but I can still change something in my community. So John Pound started gathering the children together from his community, and in his small workshop, he put up a paper with letters and numbers, and he was encouraging children to learn those letters, to learn those numbers, how to add them, how to do subtraction, how to do multiplication, as much as he knew as well. And if a child couldn't afford any paper or anything that he could do his learning on, he taught them how to write on sand, because he still wanted everyone, no matter how poor they were, to be able to have access to some sort of education. And at one point, he had a cohort of 40 children from the community who he was teaching basic literacy and maths. What he did in Portsmouth was such an inspiration for other people that over the coming years, other schools for people, for children coming from poor families were opened. And from there, universal free education was born, the one that we know today. And that's why John Pounds was such an important person in the history of education in this country. A man who was not wealthy, a man who didn't go to school himself, but he had some basic knowledge and willingness, compassion, and love for the children in his community. And now our children can have access to free education throughout the country. John Pound shows to us that you don't need to be a rich person or to have amazing gifts that people can put on BBC to make a difference in your life and in the life of those around you. Good stewardship means that no matter how small my gift is, no matter how small my talent is, I can change something in my life and in the life of other people. However, stewardship is one of those areas of life that has been neglected and left behind. One, because, well, we don't understand the word stewardship very well. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago where I realized that organizations and charities outside of the church, they all focus on principles of stewardship, doing things better, helping more, managing the organization better. They know stewardship. And they speak about stewardship more than we speak about stewardship, who have been called by God to be good stewards 2,000 years ago, and actually even about 6,000 years ago from the Garden of Eden. If we truly understood stewardship, and if we didn't run away from stewardship, from good management of God's blessings, we would understand that our life has to change completely. Because everything that we do is linked to our sense of duty and responsibility before God. When the personal ministries department is organizing an outreach program, what makes me get involved in that program is my responsibility, because I know that God has entrusted a mission to me. God expects me to go and get involved, to take the good news to others, to be there with those who are sick, with those who are poor, with those who are in prison, with those who are in care homes, and so on. It's my sense of stewardship that pushes me to get involved in personal ministries. It's my sense of stewardship of the truth that God has revealed to me that makes me want to study my Sabbath school lesson and read my Bible. It's my sense of stewardship, of understanding that I've been blessed with a relationship with God that makes me pray more. And I will say something that many people don't understand. Even coming to church here, having a church to go to and a church family is a blessing as well that I have to be a good steward over. It's not just four walls that I have to go to a meeting once a week, but it's a blessing that I have to wonder, well, how am I contributing to keeping this blessing going? Our relationship as a church family is part of my responsibility as well. How do I contribute to this family? Or do I just come and expect others to do something for me? Good stewardship would challenge us to live differently, to live better, to love better, and to also serve better. So that's why today I chose the text from 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 to 11, and I'm going to read it again. But the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayers. And above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it as with the ability which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. We have Peter writing here and warning people that they have to take things seriously in those days and today. Because Peter raises a very important issue that was a reality in those days, but it is much more a reality of our days. Unless you ignore the news and you live in a bubble somewhere isolated, you cannot ignore the fact that our world is getting from bad to worse, and actually from worse to much worse every single day. So when Peter is saying here that we have to be good stewards of the manifold grace of God, he is saying it in the context of the time. And what does he say about time? The end of all things is at hand. So if you look around and you see that the time is short and the end is near, and you don't get serious about how good of a steward you are over the blessings that God has given to you, then there will be nothing else to convince you to be a good steward. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayers. And he's calling to a holistic stewardship. We will go through the text in a moment, calling us to be responsible over every area of our life. You see, he's not just calling for us to return tithes and offerings, but he's giving warnings about aspects of our life that we're no longer used to and maybe we're not even comfortable with. Well, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. I don't know about you, but when I joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which was back home in Romania, I would go to church Sabbath morning, and very often I would be invited for lunch at someone's house. I've been in the UK for 14, almost 15 years. And I don't know if I've been invited to someone's house 2 or 3 times. When I became a pastor, it was different because, as a pastor, you call someone and say, well, I'm coming. But be hospitable to one another without grumbling. That part about grumbling even applies to pastors when they call. Pastor wants to come, so I have to welcome him. Don't get me wrong, some people really love that. Melvan, we had a lovely meal together. Yeah, Melvan is a great cook. You can visit Melvan. So Peter is calling us to do things that are against the trend of society in those days and today. Just like Jesus went against his culture and he challenged believers to live differently and do some things that were countercultural in those days, Peter is also reminding us that, you know what, it's not only about going to church once a week, it's about much more than that. Be hospitable, as each one has received a gift, minister to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, let him do it as with the ability with which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. That is holistic stewardship that we are called to live by, because time, the end of all things, is at hand. So I want you to reflect. How are you using the gifts God has given to you? Are you managing your time wisely? Are you using your talents to bless others? Are you being a faithful steward with your financial resources? What are the areas of my life where improvement can and should happen from now on? These are crucial questions that demand action, and they should challenge us every single day. So let's go back quickly. I'm looking at the time as well, and I know there is the care home visit also. And there's food in the meantime as well. I don't want to get between people and food because, yeah, I've been there where people look at me, in a funny way because I'm going over the time when they were supposed to have the meal. So let's look briefly at a few of the points that Peter is making here, where he says, "But the end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayer." Well, Peter is calling us here to be good stewards over one of the most precious resources that God has given us, time. Because you know what? These days, we are discouraged from being good stewards over our time. You wake up and you have to catch up with the latest notifications on emails, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, WhatsApp. There was a time in the past when you would turn the TV on and maybe you had 3 or 4 channels or maybe 10, and there was probably nothing to watch on any of those, so you would just switch the TV off and go and read a book. Today, you don't need to worry about that, because if there's nothing to watch on TV, you can go on Netflix, on YouTube. You have more videos on YouTube than you could watch in a million lives. So there is always something to keep you busy. There are more distractions in our life that can help us to waste our time than reminders to manage our time wisely and make the most of every moment. And I was reading about people who have decided that time is very important and have decided they have to take action. Let me ask you, do you know how old Martin Luther King Jr. was when he gave the speech, "I have a dream"? He was 34 years old. You know, at that time, he could have said, "You know what, maybe the time is not right. Maybe we have to wait a few more years. Maybe we have to," there's all sorts of excuses that he could have come up with. Maybe we have to take it to the church board and wait until the board agrees with it. He could have put it off another 10, 15, 20 years, as we put many decisions in our lives as well. But he said, "No, I am young, but I still have to do it because the time, the right time is now." Time is a non-renewable resource. Once time passes, you can't get it back. Have you heard anyone saying, or have you ever said, "Well, this is 5 minutes of my life that I'll never get back"? Or "This is an hour of my life that I'll never get back"? Well, that's because time is not something that we can get a second chance. That's why Paul is writing in Ephesians 5, 15 and 16, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil." Listen to what Ellen White writes in Christ Object Lessons. "Our time belongs to God. Every moment is his, and we are under the most solemn obligation to improve it to his glory. Of no talent he has given will he require a more strict account than of our time." Because if you make other mistakes in life, you can get a second chance. But once time is gone, it's gone. But we live in an age where especially technology has revolutionized how we interact, and it has made it incredibly easy to bury our time in activities that yield no spiritual or relational growth. We no longer understand the essence of relationships, because our relationships are about liking a message on WhatsApp or on social media, or sending a prayer emoji, which some people say is actually a high five emoji, but anyway. And that's our relationship. We left the face-to-face time away. Even with church, this trend is very evident, because there are times when it feels that church is happening more on WhatsApp than in person. Well, being in the 3 churches before last month, I was probably in about 40 groups. It's hard to keep up with all the messages coming. And you know what? You would see so many people active on WhatsApp, sharing and commenting. But in church, they come and sit down and then they disappear. Because that is easier to do than actually being with one another, talking to one another, serving together with one another. So we must ask ourselves if we have our priorities in order and if we live each day with purpose. Reflect on your relationship with one another and how much time you're setting aside for relationship with other people. How much time you're setting aside for your time with God. How much time you're setting aside for time for yourself. And if you're making the most of the time that God has given you. I like another part of Christ Object Lessons where Ellen White writes, there are some who think that if they give money to the cause of Christ, this is all they're required to do. The precious time in which they might do personal service for him passes unimproved. We come and give our contribution to the church and Lord, be happy with that. Leave me alone. Well, look after me, but leave me alone. But the time for me getting involved in building the church up and taking the gospel to people out there who are looking for God, but they're confused and they don't know where to go, that passes unimproved. But it is the privilege and duty of all who have health and strength to render to God active service. All are to labor in winning souls to Christ. Donations of money cannot take the place of this. So that's why, as stewardship director, I could come and talk about money, but I can't talk about money until I talk about what would really lead us to feel free to give the money. There's no point in seeing tithes and offerings going up if my time and my commitment before God doesn't go up as well. Then Peter goes on in verse 10, as each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Well, here Peter is reminding us that each one of us has received a gift from God. And these gifts or talents are diverse. And they reflect God's grace in our lives. And it is our duty as Christians to recognize these gifts, to nurture them, and use them to serve others and glorify God. But often we leave those gifts, those talents unused because we have fears. We might be comparing our gifts and our talents with others, and we fear, well, you know what, I'm not as good as so-and-so. I can't go up and preach at the front. I can't go up and say a prayer at the front. I cannot come and help with the workday tomorrow. I cannot do this. I cannot do that. There is someone else who can do it better. And before you know it, there is no one to come for the workday. And you just have to be here alone. Before you know it, there is no one to serve in the different ministries of the church. Before you know it, there is no one to go out to the care home. There is no one to do anything that is meaningful in the work of the church. Gifts and talents and skills that have been given by God that are really buried. But when we think about God giving talents and gifts and skills for us to use his way for his glory, we automatically think about the parable of the talents. And you know what I learned from the parable of the talents? Well, that some people will have a lot more talents than me. Some people will have 5 talents. You know what? Some people will have 2 talents. I might just have 1. But that's not something to be worried about. It's not something to make me feel bad. But God will never give you more talents than you can handle because he doesn't want to put a burden on you. But at the same time, God will not underestimate you and give you less talents than you actually can handle. So the talents that God has blessed you with are the exact right number of talents that you can do, that you can put to good use, and that you can contribute to the church, to the body of Christ here in Riverway Church. So no matter how small or big you might think your gift is, that's the gift that God has given to you to put to good use. So think about what you might enjoy doing, what you might like doing. Talk to other people who might help you to see, because I've seen the other side where some people think they have gifts that they don't have. Some people collect gifts from others and they claim they're theirs, but they're not. Speak to other people as well. Ask other people what they see in you. And then we'll be able to use our abilities, our talents, God's way for God's glory. But you know what you need for that? You need for that for people to know one another. Because there's no way people can identify your gift, your calling, unless they know you. And we go back to the stewardship of time, which leads to the stewardship of relations, and the call for us to live better with one another, to love one another more, and to serve together. No one will know who I am unless I let them see who I am. And I will not know what other people are like and what God has blessed them with and what contribution they can bring to my life unless I take the time to intentionally know them. Otherwise, the key word by which we live our life is assumptions. Because we make assumptions about one another more often than we should. And from assumptions, gossip is born. And from gossip, different groups are born. And from different groups, a broken church is born. Good stewards over our talents as well. And lastly, we have our treasures. Well, treasures encompass all the material resources that God has blessed us with, our money, our possessions, and our wealth. And the first step is to recognize that everything that we have and everything that we are is God's. And if it wasn't for God, we wouldn't be where we are. We wouldn't have what we have. The moment we do that, and the moment we see God's work in our life and the way He has led and prepared our life so far, it's going to be a lot easier to understand that we have to live more responsibly as well. And you see, financial stewardship involves managing our money in a way that is aligned with biblical principles. And let me give you a few practical steps to help us to be faithful stewards of our treasures. First of all, budgeting. You know, creating and maintaining a budget is essential for good financial stewardship because it helps us to track our income and expenses, ensuring that we live within our means and we allocate our resources wisely. Proverbs 27, 23, and 24 advises this: be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds, for riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. Now, if you didn't know that budgeting is in the Bible, well, it is. Because Proverbs, the wise man, is writing here, be diligent to know the state of your flocks. Because the flocks that you have today could be all eaten by the wolf overnight. The flocks that you have today will help you to understand the wool and the milk that you will have to get you over the winter. Knowing your flocks can help you to understand what your children and grandchildren and family will have in case your time of grace is over. Be diligent to know the state of your flocks. The scripture encourages us to be intentional and wise in managing our affairs. And this takes me to the second step, and that is the part about saving and even investing, because while budgeting is paramount and giving is important as well, saving and investing are also part of good stewardship, because it helps us to have a cushion for future and emergency needs. And I was reminded about the story of Joseph in Genesis 41, where we have this illustration of wisdom of saving during the 7 years of abundance to be ready for the 7 years of famine. Being wise in managing finances is not about not trusting in God. You know, Jesus could come tomorrow, but Jesus would come in 20 years. I've met a lot of people, pastors first of all, who have gone around pastoring different churches and districts over the years. And when they retired, they were homeless because they didn't plan ahead. When God is giving a blessing in good times, we have to be responsible over that blessing. And I'm looking at, let's say, the last 10, 15 years. And I'm thinking, in my case, and I'm sure maybe you might have experienced this as well. If I would have been a good steward, a good manager over the blessings that God gave me 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have to worry about some of the things that I'm worrying today. It's not that God is not answering prayer today and He's not providing today, but you know what? God provided opportunities that I have not made the most of. And every single one of us is getting opportunities and blessings from God that we don't manage properly. We don't manage wisely the way God would want us to. And then we start to complain and grumble that God is not answering our prayer. There was a story about a man who was going to work every morning through a park, and he would sit on the bench and take a break just to clear his mind before going to work. And every morning he prayed for God to open a door, to give him an opportunity to talk to someone about him. And after the second or third morning, a homeless man came and sat on the bench next to him. And the man kept praying. And he left, and he came the next day and he prayed again. And the same homeless man came and sat down next to him. And after a week, the man realized that, God gave me the opportunity right next to me. And I was still praying for God to give me something because God didn't give me what I was expecting Him to give me. In our prayers, God responds in the way that is best for us. That might not align with our vision or our expectation, but God does answer prayer, as Angela rightly said. So let's keep an open mind and be careful to the blessings that God is bringing our way. Because you know what, when I know what my ins and outs are, and when I'm wise in the way I manage my household, I will not come to church and worry, where am I going to get the 5p to contribute for the building fund or something else? Because I will know exactly what God has blessed me with, what I have to contribute, and I will not be worried that it will take my food away for the next week. Being good managers, good stewards of God's blessings, God's way, for God's glory. God has entrusted us with so much time, talents, and treasures that are not ours to keep, but they are gifts from God to be used for His glory. So the question is, how will we respond to this trust? Will we bury our talents? Will we squander our time and hoard our treasures? Or will we rise to the challenge, faithfully managing all that God has given to us to advance His kingdom and to bless others as well? I will close with a story. Probably about 9 years ago, I was with my wife in central London. We were having a meal in McDonald's. Don't judge. And a man sat next to us. he told us that he retired and he was just coming over to the UK to collect his pension. But the man, after working his entire life here, decided that, well, sitting at home and just using his pension pot to live from one day to the other is not what he's interested in. So he took a big chunk of his pension pot and he purchased a truck. He purchased a projection, an outdoor projection system and a sound system for an outdoor cinema. But here is where the interesting part comes. He shipped that truck and the outdoor cinema system over to Brazil. He was English, from England. But he thought about children living in small, isolated villages in Brazil. So he shipped all of that over there. And every night, he would go to a different village and put on cartoons for the children in those isolated villages. Because he said this is how he feels his life is lived in a meaningful way. This man was not a Christian. He was not going to church. He was not an Adventist. But that story stuck with me because he realized that he has to be a good steward over his time and resources without knowing anything about God. So if people who know about God and about the blessings that God give them, if we would live as faithful stewards, how much more of a difference could we make in our life, in the life of those around us, and in our world? May God help us to be wise stewards, to never ignore the blessings that He gives us or to see them as too little, to use our time wisely, to put our talents to good use, and to be wise about our finances as well. May God bless us all. Amen.